and welcome into this week's book club episode of Star Wars Bloodline by Claudia Gray. If you're unfamiliar with this series, we are going through this book a couple of chapters at a time to really get into the themes and delve into deeply into what the story is doing. We've done this before with the Aftermath trilogy as well. If you see in the link below, you will find a playlist that takes you back to Aftermath 1 if you're interested in that. But with that, let's get into the story. I'm discussing chapters 4 and 5 today. Chapters 4 and 5. So here we are kind of getting our last few introductions for main players in the story. We have the character of Joff, Sea Striker. Now, Joff is from the planet of Gatalenta, Gatalenta, however you would choose to pronounce that. Joff is not the only person in this book from that planet. The character of Tylin Gar, who is another senator that we saw in the first chapter, he is from there, and it is also the homeworld of one Amilyn Holdo. You can learn more about the culture of this planet by reading Leia, Princess of Alderaan, that features a young Amilyn Holdo. But it's just kind of an interesting connection that this is a planet that has kind of found its way to a lot of key figures in these stories. Joff is described as a character who wants adventure and excitement. And I liked that word choice because that is a very loaded line for a Star Wars fan. It takes you right back to Yoda saying, adventure, excitement, a Jedi craves not these things. Initially, we see that this guy probably not super cut out to be a Jedi. Now, I can't help but notice the connection in his name, Joff Sea Striker, to Luke Skywalker. I'm sure that's intentional, not necessarily for you to think that he's like Luke Skywalker, but to kind of give you that backworld farm boy-esque kind of feel that he is somebody that's going to be a lot like Luke, somebody who wanted to be in the stars, somebody who was going to be a pilot. We hear that he was involved in the ceremony for the statue that we'd seen in the first chapter. It describes that a certain amount of time has passed. We know that he's young, we know that he's passionate, we know that he's talented, or he wouldn't be involved with this crew. So you're getting to know him pretty well, and he's also how we continue to get to know Greer. So more and more continues to come out about Greer in this time. First off, we learn that Greer is apparently stunningly beautiful, something that Leia might notice, but probably wouldn't notice in the same way that Joff would. Joff describes that he can't even really have a crush on Greer because she's so far out of his league. It would be like being lovesick over a sunset, which was a pretty interesting way to describe it. So, you can kind of leave that up to you. Do you think that there's going to be something between them as the book progresses, or is it just a way to describe what Greer looks like, and then kind of immediately shut it down? The other thing we learn as they talk is that Greer won the junior 5 sabers. So the 5 sabers is the race that Han Solo has been conducting, has been a part of. You also hear the 5 sabers mentioned in Star Wars Resistance, which is a harkening back to this book. That she won it at a junior level means, she's been a pilot for a very long time. She was a protege to Han Solo. Something that makes Joff a little bit jealous. Something that doesn't make Joff jealous is Corey. Corey shows up. Corey's young, just 16, something like that, age-wise, and Joff is like, great, I'm not going to be the youngest person on the mission. He even describes himself as like, I'm worldly even. So he's a guy who wants an ego. I don't even know that I'd say that he has a big ego. He's the type of guy that wants to have a big ego, and so he's finding ways to build it up, but he has all of these things he's defensive about. He's defensive about his height, right? He's a whole 1.5 millimeters taller than regulation, that sort of thing. So he's a guy that has self-image problems isn't really the right phrase. It's probably a little bit too harsh or intense for what he's going through, but he's a guy who is kind of worried about his image, and not necessarily in a vain sort of way, but probably because he's got a chip on his shoulder trying to make up for where he's from. The tone of everything shifts once Castro shows up. Everyone else is dressed and ready for a long flight. Castro shows up ready to walk into his negotiations. He's the only one that's dressed up. He's aware that he's the only one that's dressed up. Things are cold. Leia's not wanting to talk to him. He's not wanting to talk to Leia. At first, it's just, Joff describes it as the temperature goes down a couple of degrees. Greer's like, you're going to be more comfortable in your X-Wing flying escort than we're going to be on our ship. And so it shows you that, this time hasn't really nothing has really changed in this short amount of time that, they probably haven't really communicated a whole lot. We haven't missed a whole lot, even though time is ticking on. They get on the ship and they go to fly, and Leia hides out in her bunk most of the time. She doesn't want to deal with Castro. She's trying to minimize the amount of time that she will have to speak with him. So while she's in her quarters, she has a couple of really interesting thoughts. First, she goes to send a message to Luke and Ben. Here we learn that Luke and Ben are off doing things, and they're off doing things where they can't get a good signal. They can't relay information back and forth. Now, when I was reading the book the first time, I wondered if this was convenience or if this was largely, is this book happening at the same time as the Jedi Temple attack or something like that? And not that anything in the writing implies that, but that was something that was going through my mind when I read it for the first time. And it's a really creative way to add tension. Luke and Ben are going to be such important characters to Leia, but they really want to center the story around Leia. So Claudia Gray is putting those characters in Leia's life, but in an unreachable state. That way, the story is not about Leia depending on her brother or necessarily raising her son, which is something that I think at the time this book was written, they weren't ready to put into new canon yet. We have that, and there's a good reason why they're not there. Even Han, who has dialogue in this book, we see Han in the book. Han is off somewhere else, not going on this adventure with Leia. So it's a really good framework to let this be a story that is about Leia, and Leia going on an adventure and being herself outside of these close relationships that she has without denying the close relationships. It wouldn't really make sense for Leia to go off on this dangerous mission and not talk to Han or bring in Han on it or to not want to be involved with her son. It's a very solid framework for the story. While Leia is in there thinking to herself, she has another interesting train of thought, which is she talks about how Han is so naturally a mentor character. Now, I knew that Han was being the mentor character in The Force Awakens, and that made sense to me, especially because as we came to find out, Luke was largely not going to be in The Force Awakens, even though he made sense as the mentor character. And traditionally in Star Wars, we've seen the mentor character be Force-sensitive characters, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Yoda, but that's also largely because our main characters have always been Jedi or children of Jedi. You get to the sequel trilogy, and you get Rey, and Rey obviously has this mentor relationship with Luke, but she doesn't have it right away. So it's just something that I didn't really attribute to Han Solo's character, but one that I saw was just a necessity for what the story was bringing. But the way Claudia writes Leia thinking about Han, it makes a lot of sense. Describes Han as being this mentor figure for Luke in A New Hope, which makes sense. Han is a good deal older than him, good deal older than Leia, to be honest, and that he even was always taken care of and always watching over Leia, and how Han took Greer under his wing and was teaching her things, and had this thought of, this is what Han always wanted with Ben. This is the relationship he always wanted with his son that he felt like he couldn't have for any number of reasons. And, we talk about, going back to the Aftermath trilogy, we read Han being worried about his relationship with Ben versus Ben's relationship with Leia because Han doesn't have the Force. I know how it was said in Aftermath, but there's a good couple of decades in between Aftermath and this book, and I'm very curious how it played out, especially as Ben got older. Was it that there simply couldn't be the same connection there because Han didn't have the Force? Or was Ben pushing Han away because he had the Force? Or was Han not connecting to Ben because he was self-conscious? Clearly there was some sort of gap, but it was really interesting and really kind of tragic to see this idea that, mentoring, if not fathering, was so intrinsic to Han's character. And it makes a lot of sense in that Han has always kind of been this good guy character. Even in Solo, a Star Wars story, Kira says, I know who you really are. You're really the good guy. You're not the cynical dude that's caught up in all this stuff like you're pretending to be. And that maybe that's that heart, that kind of kept Han grounded through all of his more illicit activities in his life. Ben's absence in this book, to me, is a felt absence. Now, that could be because I'm a freakish Kylo Ren fan, and this is something I would read for that, and it's certainly not because I feel like Leia ought to be defined by her son, but a parent has a connection to their child, and it's not unreasonable to think that that's going to be such a major component. And so to read a book set just 6 years before The Force Awakens, where we know that Ben has become Kylo, and he's become this evil character, his absence in this part of their story is a very weighted, felt absence to me. And I don't know if that's my bias or if it is Claudia Gray's writing. I feel like I should attribute it to Claudia Gray's writing. But it's something that this book does really well. Now, speaking of writing, here's an interesting point. By the time Leia has this thought, she is in the cockpit with Greer, and Castro has given up and kind of gone back to his quarters at this point. And then Castro walks back. So Leia is thinking about Han's void in his heart because of his relationship or lack thereof with Ben, and then is interrupted by Castro. Now, there's two possibilities. One, simple plot, right? We got Leia having a character moment, thinking about Ben, and then the plot continues, but it's also interesting that Leia is thinking about Han and Han's relationship with younger characters and ushering them and teaching them. And here comes Castro, the young, brash senator who came from a family of wealth, which Leia's adopted family was a family of wealth, who's very similar to her in many ways, and yet very different from her in a lot of very key ways. Again, I don't want to tip my hat and say too much because I know how this book ends, and a lot of you are probably wondering, is Castro going to end up being evil? What's the relationship is he going to have with Leia? And I should note that him being good or bad does not necessarily negate any kind of mentor-mentee relationship he could have with Leia. This can go in several different ways. But reading it this time, and reading it for writing, that was something I noticed. And I kind of wonder if this is a way of subconsciously connecting that we see these roles with Han, but Leia has the same fault that so many great characters have, which is she can see the good in others, maybe not pick up on the things within herself as much, right? So as much as she is seeing that void in Han's life, she could be feeling that void in her own. And as much as it's hard to think about that void in Han's life, it is a void, it's easier to think about it that way than to think about it herself, because then she can be caring for Han instead of worrying after herself. And I think this is a very intentional point, that it's Castro that interrupts this line of thought. As the chapter wraps up, Leia tries to have some pleasantries, try to talk about the mission, what have you, and Castro interrupts her and just apologizes. And he has a very good apology about, I wasn't considering how you might have felt in my eagerness, and, we both traded words, but yours were understandable because of where you were coming from, mine were not understandable because of where I was coming from. And it's a very good, very well-crafted, very political apology, and it's one I wonder, did he come up with himself, or did he get advice from somebody in the week of time, I think, that has passed in between chapters. And Leia ultimately accepts the apology, mostly out of expedience. They're gotta work together. She would rather just move on. Also because it is a good apology, she describes it that way. Not necessarily good in terms of earnest, but good in terms of well-crafted. And she as a politician can recognize that well-crafted apology. So here they go again. They're going to try to work together, which brings us to Chapter 5. Chapter 5 takes place on the planet of Baska. Baska is a little hard for me to say, mostly because I want to keep saying Bastilla, but it's Baska, whatever. It's underground. It's a whole planet that exists underground, which is a really interesting ecosystem. The idea is, the surface is uninhabitable, so everything goes on underneath the surface. There's a lot of descriptions about the difference between indoors and outdoors, which I really liked, and how they still feel the need to designate a difference between the two, which is cool. Leia instantly tries to take charge. She instantly is like, this is how we're going to run this mission, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do. In this exchange, Castro makes a joke at her expense, which 3PO misses and kind of breaks the tension, but this is the point where Leia goes, okay, we don't like each other. It's mutual and it's fine, right? Castro has made it clear, he apologized, but he doesn't like her. She doesn't like him, but they have to work together, which is where we probably figured they were, but now it is established, it's clear, and they're gonna kind of continue on doing what they're gonna do. The way this is described is really interesting because it's written in a way that's so Leia, like her thought process is so Leia on the Death Star, in A New Hope, bossing Han and Luke around. It is Princess Leia to a T, and to me it feels both very Princess Leia, very apt, this is how Leia would be responding, but also very much, this is Leia, flustered. This is Leia letting her feelings about this dynamic impact her decision. And of course they would. They would affect anyone they're affecting Castrophos. He just made a snarky response. It's just that we're reading it from Leia's perspective, so it becomes a little bit more clear. And this is something Gray does so well with her writing, that she can convey plot points and she can convey story points, but do it through a character's perspective in such a way that you might not necessarily pick up that that's what's going on, right? So when you read Leia's interpretation of Castropho, you have to wonder, is this Castropho, or is this how Leia sees Castropho, and is there a difference? Is Leia seeing him clearly? Is Leia not? It's very effective writing in character, just bringing in the perspective and the point of view of who you're talking about. On the landing pad, they meet the government officials, which are probably just puppets to begin with. They're lathering on the praise, which of course they're just doing to get the crew that has landed, to be trickable, which is not really working. Greer stays with the ship because they're not dumb. Leia notices that there's always air moving, there's always a breeze through the tunnels, which she thinks is contrived, something that is done artificially to stop echoes so that the tunnels can hold secrets. So this whole place is designed literally underground, but also to be the underground. Like, she can just tell this is built for crime and smuggling and gambling and all of these things. Speaking of gambling, they reach a casino. Leia takes her host by surprise by claiming she wants to play a game of sabacc, and instantly Castropho is appalled by this idea, and to get back at him, she calls him out for ogling the independent contractors that are up on the next level. Now again, here's a very interesting duality in what's going on with the writing. On the one hand, we get Leia getting the one-up on Castropho, which of course we want. We are siding with Leia. We usually, I don't want to assume, but typically, at least from the perspective of how this novel's written, and from the nature that she's Leia, we want to see Leia showing this snarky, smart-mouth junior senator, what's what. So we like it because it's like, oh, Leia, doesn't want up. He gets embarrassed because he was just ogling independent contractors. Is his embarrassment genuine? Is it a sign of his youth that he would be embarrassed that he didn't recognize workers? Or is it contrived? Because if he really is this horrible, corrupt senator, you should have seen this before. So there again is something that's interesting. There's little nuggets to character that are being hidden in the way the story is being expressed through Leia. So on the one hand, we get to laugh at Castropho's expense, but on the other hand, we are being shown either something about his character or we are being duped by his character, and it's up to us to decide which one it is. Now, Leia does notice that Castropho is a winning politician, and he's very good at attracting a lot of attention and being very charismatic, where Leia's presence is a commanding one, right? Leia's in the room, you're going to listen to her because she has that presence about her. His is more charismatic, and you want to listen to him because he's a lot of fun, and she's thinking about using him as, like, a little carrot on a string to distract everybody around her. But it's at this point that Leia notices an old woman and a group of people, but mainly this old woman sitting on a table off to the side, and that they seem to not be interested. And that's weird because two high-profile senators just showed up. How are they not even curious about what's going on? And Leia does eventually play a game of sabacc. She creams everybody at sabacc because she was taught by Han and Lando how to play. And then she uses her winnings to buy everyone drinks. So she's winning the favor of everyone there, which is a really smart play on her part. Castropho is seemingly appalled, although I think he kind of has to admit that it's a pretty good trick. Even then, the woman and the others at the table don't react. But then Leia's able to ask a few questions, and she learns that they are from the planet of Daxam 4. And Leia is picking up a thread for where the story can go after they meet with Rin Riven. But that's really what I have to say about these two chapters this week. A lot of good stuff here as the story is starting to ramp up. The first couple of chapters were kind of laying the groundwork for the characters. Now, as we go, we're going to see more and more of the story develop as the plot moves forward, and I'm excited to get there. For next week, continuing to read 2 chapters a week, so we're going to read 6 and 7. 6 and 7 for next Monday. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about the story so far. Please leave me a comment letting me know. If you're not already, please follow us on all of the socials, and I'll talk to you guys next week.